Hi everyone. I wanted to read you a story today called Chester Raccoon and the Acorn Full of Memories. We read a book about Chester before called The Kissing Hand, which I really loved, so I hope you enjoy this book as well. Chester Raccoon and the Acorn Full of Memories by Audrey Penn, illustrated by Barbara Gibson. I decided to read this story sitting outside today, so I hope the sound of the birds in the background isn't too distracting. But given this is a story about animals, maybe it's okay. Chester Raccoon climbed into his tree hollow and frowned. Skittle Squirrel didn't come to school today, he told his mother. Owl teacher said he had an accident and he wouldn't be coming back. What's an accident? An accident is something that happens that isn't supposed to happen, explained Mrs. Raccoon. She lifted Chester onto her lap and folded her warm, loving arms around him. Did Owl teacher say anything else about Skittle Squirrel? Did she say he died? I think so, said Chester, but I don't know what that means either. Well, do you remember what happened to old Mr. Beaver? Chester nodded. His heart quit beating and his body didn't work anymore. That's right, Mrs. Raccoon told him. That's what happens when somebody dies. She put a comforting arm around Chester's shoulder. That's what happened when Skittle Squirrel died? Oh, now that Chester understood what happened to Skittle Squirrel, his inside felt jumbled and he was very sad. Mrs. Raccoon gently stroked the top of his head. I'm very sorry about Skittle Squirrel, Chester. Chester turned and faced his mother. Skittle Squirrel is my friend and I want to play with him, he cried. Why won't his body work? Why doesn't his heart beat? I'm afraid that's one of those questions no forest animal can answer. It's like asking, who lights up the sun then blows it out? Who collects the pieces of the moon when it disappears and then puts the pieces back together when it's full? I know what you can do. Why don't you make a memory of Skittle Squirrel? That way you'll never forget him. Well, how do you make a memory? Asked Chester. You begin by finding something that reminds you of him. The way your piece of tree bark reminds you of the hollow where we used to live. I'd rather have Skittle Squirrel than something that reminds me of him, sniffled Chester. I know you would, soothed his mother, and I know how much you'll miss him. But making a memory of him will help. She lifted Chester off her lap and wrapped his tiny hands in hers. Tell me what Skittle Squirrel liked. Well, he liked butterflies, Chester said thoughtfully, and acorns. Butterfly and acorns, his mother repeated out loud. And where was Skittle Squirrel's favorite place to play? The butterfly pond. Mrs. Raccoon bent down and kissed Chester on his forehead. Chester's ears twitched and his muzzle blushed. Let's go see if butterflies and acorns can help us make a memory of Skittle Squirrel, shall we? She asked him. She led Chester outside, picked up his little brother Ronnie, who had his curious little nose inside an anthill, and walked the two cubs down the wooded path toward the butterfly pond. On their way to the pond, Chester's best friend Casey popped out from behind the tree. Where are you going? Asked Chester. We're going to the butterfly pond to make a memory of Skittle Squirrel. Do you want to come? Okay, but I don't know how to make a memory. Will you find something? Like my piece of tree bark, only it's not tree bark because it has to do with butterflies and squirrels, and it's something that reminds you of Skittle Squirrel. I can do that, said Cassie. As the four raccoons scurried toward the pond, More and more of Skittle Squirrel's friends asked if they too could come along and make a memory. Before long, 2 deer, 6 skunks, 3 opossums, 14 rabbits, badger, a bluebird, 6 mourning doves, a green snake, 22 mice, 4 squirrels, a beaver, and 2 chipmunks walked, crawled, slithered, hopped, and flew to the edge of the pond. "I've never seen so many butterflies," chittered Mrs. Raccoon when they arrived. There were butterflies and more butterflies. Butterflies were everywhere. They were over the pond, in the trees, under the bushes, on the flowers, and resting on single blades of grass between the animals' feet. "What do I do now?" asked Chester as a bright purple butterfly balanced on the tip of his nose. "Tell me a story about Skittle Squirrel," said Mrs. Raccoon. "What kind of story?" "Something that happened here at the pond." Chester scrunched his nose thoughtfully, and the butterfly flew away. "Once when we were playing here, about a gazillion butterflies landed on Skittle Squirrel all at the same time. He was so covered in butterflies you could hardly see his fur. He thought that all those butterflies standing on him, he could fly. So he took a running start and jumped into the air, and he got to the edge of the pond and he landed splash on his belly, and all the butterflies flew off. He dripped all the way back to his tree." "That's a wonderful memory," laughed Mrs. Raccoon. "Do you have another one?" "One day, Skittle Squirrel made us late for school because a caterpillar was turning into a butterfly and he wouldn't let us miss it. We all watched the butterfly come out of the chrysalis and spread open its brand new wings. Skittle Squirrel was so excited he told all the other butterflies what happened, even though they already knew." "That's a lovely memory," agreed Chester's mother. Suddenly, Chester looked sad. "One day after school, Skittle Squirrel came here and buried all the acorns he had collected for the winter. But when he wanted them, he forgot where he buried them. He really loved those acorns. Everyone in school helped him look for them." "Did he find them?" asked Mrs. Raccoon. "No," said Chester. Mrs. Raccoon stood up on her back legs and looked around. She spotted a hillside not far away and patted Chester on the top of his head. "I think I know where those acorns are buried," she told him. She pointed to a small group of brand new oak trees growing at the base of the hillside. Chester suddenly noticed a beautiful black and orange butterfly on the ground beside his foot. When it folded its wings, he saw the acorn beneath it. He gently and carefully lifted the acorn and the butterfly off the ground, held his breath, and waited patiently until the butterfly flew away on its own. He clutched the acorn in front of his paw and looked up at his mother. "This acorn is the memory I'll take home," he told her. "I'll keep it with my special piece of tree bark, and every time I look at it, I'll think of Skittle Squirrel. It's a beautiful acorn, Chester, and it will make a perfect memory." With the acorn securely clutched in his paw, Chester scampered over the Skittle Squirrel trees and placed a kissing hand on each new trunk. "I'll never forget you, Skittle Squirrel. Thank you for being my friend." The end. That's a beautiful story about a subject that isn't necessarily easy, right? I don't know if any of you have had someone you love that's no longer here, or a pet maybe that isn't with us any longer. Those are all hard things to deal with, but I love the way Chester's mom gave him a way of remembering the person that he loved. So kind of like the kissing hand, that person's memory can always be with Chester. I hope you enjoyed this story, and I hope it helps if you have somebody that you're missing. I'll be back to read to you soon.